she said, laughing to the single-father janitor. "I'll give you my salary if you can translate this." And he surprised her. Before we dive in, this video is traveling across time zones right now. Share what season you're experiencing where you live. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Oliver Matthews pushed his mop bucket down the marble hallway of Grandview Industries' executive floor. At 32, his hands were already weathered from years of manual labor, but his eyes still held the sharp intelligence that once earned him respect in very different circles. The early morning shift meant he could pick up 5-year-old Victoria from daycare by 3 o'clock, a schedule that worked perfectly for a single father doing everything he could to provide. Clara Hendricks, the company's 38-year-old CEO, emerged from the elevator with her usual air of authority. Her designer heels clicked against the floor as she approached, a smirk playing on her lips. In her manicured hand, she held a document covered in what appeared to be foreign text. "Hey, janitor," Clara called out, her voice carrying across the hallway loud enough for the gathering employees to hear. "You look smart enough. Think you can handle a little challenge?" Oliver paused, his grip tightening on the mop handle. Around them, marketing executives and financial analysts began to slow their pace, sensing entertainment brewing. Clara thrived on these moments, asserting her dominance, reminding everyone of their place in her corporate hierarchy. "I'll make you a deal," Clara continued, waving the paper dramatically. "If you can translate this document, and I mean actually translate it, not just guess, I'll give you my entire monthly salary. $150,000 cash." The hallway fell silent except for the soft whisper of expensive suits rustling as executives positioned themselves for the best view. Margaret from accounting whispered to her colleague, "This is cruel, even for Clara." But nobody dared speak up against the woman who controlled their paychecks. Oliver studied Clara's face, noting the cruel satisfaction dancing in her green eyes. She was savoring this moment, confident in her superiority over the help. He glanced at the document, recognizing immediately the elegant script of classical Latin mixed with what appeared to be ancient Greek. "You're serious about this bet?" Oliver asked quietly, his voice steady despite the humiliation burning in his chest. "Dead serious," Clara laughed, extending the paper toward him. "Unless you're too intimidated by a little foreign language. I wouldn't blame you. This came from a European acquisition deal worth millions. Probably way over your head." Victoria's sweet face flashed through Oliver's mind, her bright smile when he picked her up from daycare, the way she hugged his neck and told him about her day. She deserved better than watching her father be humiliated by people who thought manual labor defined a person's worth. Oliver set down his mop and took the document. The Latin text began with a formal legal preamble, while the Greek sections contained specific contractual terms regarding intellectual property transfers. He'd spent 4 years studying classical languages at Harvard before everything changed. "The Latin portion," Oliver began clearly, his voice carrying across the now completely silent hallway, "establishes the framework for a subsidiary acquisition between Grandview Industries and Apollon Enterprises, based in Athens. The Greek sections specify the retention of certain patents and trademarks, particularly those related to renewable energy technologies developed by the Athens office." Clara's smug expression faltered as Oliver continued, translating complex legal terminology with the ease of someone who'd once helped draft similar documents in his previous life. The watching employees exchanged glances, sensing a shift in the power dynamic they'd witnessed moments before. "The final paragraph," Oliver concluded, "contains a confidentiality clause requiring all parties to maintain secrecy regarding the financial terms until the public announcement, scheduled for," he checked the date, "next Tuesday." The document fluttered slightly in Clara's now trembling hands as she stared at the man she'd just tried to humiliate. Around them, the hallway remained frozen in stunned silence. Clara's face had gone pale beneath her expertly applied makeup. The document in her hands suddenly felt heavier than before, not because of its weight, but because of what Oliver's accurate translation meant. This wasn't just any random paper she'd grabbed to embarrass a janitor. This was the most confidential acquisition deal Grandview Industries had worked on in years, and somehow this man in work clothes had just decoded every crucial detail. That's impossible, Clara stammered, her usual commanding presence cracking like thin ice. You can't possibly understand what this says. You're just making educated guesses. Oliver remained calm, recognizing the fear beginning to creep into her voice. The patent numbers referenced in the Greek text are EU 2847-RN and EU 2848-RN. Both relate to solar panel efficiency improvements that your company acquired last month. The acquisition price isn't listed here, but based on the royalty percentages mentioned, I'd estimate somewhere around 12 million euros. Margaret from accounting gasped audibly. That exact figure had been confidential information shared only with the senior executive team during their closed-door meeting yesterday. Clara's grip on the paper tightened until her knuckles turned white. How did you... Clara's question trailed off as she realized she was revealing classified information in front of a growing crowd of employees. Marketing assistants, junior executives, and administrative staff had all stopped pretending to work, openly staring at the unfolding drama. James Patterson from the legal department pushed through the crowd, his expression mixing curiosity with concern. Clara, perhaps we should discuss this privately. That document contains sensitive information that shouldn't be. Shut up, James, Clara snapped, her composure completely abandoned now. She turned back to Oliver, her green eyes blazing with a mixture of fury and confusion. Who are you? What kind of janitor knows classical Latin and Greek? What kind of janitor understands European patent law? Oliver picked up his mop, wringing it carefully in the bucket before responding. The kind who needs to feed his daughter and keep a roof over her head. The kind who takes whatever honest work he can find to provide for his family. That's not an answer, Clara pressed, stepping closer. I want to know who you really are. I want to know how you knew about those patents, about the acquisition details, about confidential financial information that's been shared with only 5 people in this entire company. The truth hung in the air between them like smoke from a fire neither of them was ready to acknowledge. Oliver could feel the weight of dozens of stares, employees beginning to whisper among themselves as they processed what they'd just witnessed. This moment would spread through the company like wildfire within hours. Your salary, Oliver said quietly. The $150,000 you offered. I believe you said cash. Clara's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. She hadn't expected this response, hadn't prepared for the possibility that her cruel bet might actually need to be honored. The executives around them shifted uncomfortably, recognizing that their CEO had been caught in a public commitment she never intended to fulfill. You can't be serious, Clara managed. That was obviously a joke. No one expects... I do, Oliver interrupted gently. Every person standing here heard you make that offer. A public bet, witnessed by your employees, regarding your ability to maintain superiority over someone you considered beneath you. Victoria's daycare cost $800 a month. Their small apartment rent was $1,500. Groceries, utilities, her medical checkups, clothes as she grew. It all added up to a constant struggle that kept Oliver awake most nights, calculating and recalculating their tight budget. $150,000 would change everything for his little girl. Clara looked around desperately at the watching faces, searching for an ally who might help her escape this impossible situation. But her years of treating employees as inferior beings had left her without friends in this crucial moment. The same people she'd humiliated and dismissed now watched with barely concealed satisfaction as she faced consequences for her cruelty. Fine, Clara said through gritted teeth, her voice barely audible. But this conversation isn't over. That evening, Oliver sat at the small kitchen table in their modest apartment, helping 5-year-old Victoria color in her princess book. Her tongue poked out slightly in concentration as she carefully stayed within the lines, just as he'd taught her. The late afternoon sunlight streaming through their single window caught the golden highlights in her dark hair. Hair exactly like her mother's had been. "Daddy, why do you look sad?" Victoria asked, setting down her purple crayon to study his face with the intuitive wisdom that sometimes surprised him in children her age. Oliver forced a smile, reaching over to smooth a wayward curl behind her ear. "I'm not sad, sweetheart. Just thinking about grown-up things. How was school today? Did you remember to share your crackers with Emma like we talked about?" Victoria brightened immediately, launching into an animated description of her day. She'd helped Emma during craft time, learned a new song about butterflies, and successfully tied her own shoes without help for the first time. Each small triumph filled Oliver's heart with pride and reminded him why every sacrifice was worth it. As Victoria chattered happily, Oliver's mind wandered back to the confrontation with Clara. He'd seen that look in her eyes before, the desperate confusion of someone whose worldview had just been shattered. She would investigate him now. He was certain of that. The question was how much she would discover, and whether the truth would help or destroy the fragile life he'd built for Victoria. 3 years ago, Dr. Oliver Matthews had been one of the youngest tenured professors in Harvard's Classical Studies department. His expertise in ancient languages and legal history had made him a sought-after consultant for international law firms dealing with historical property disputes and archaeological claims. The money had been excellent, the respect intoxicating, and the future seemed limitless. Then Sarah died. The heart condition had been undiagnosed, silent, and merciless. One morning she was laughing over coffee, discussing vacation plans for when Victoria was old enough to travel. By evening, she was gone, leaving Oliver alone with a 2-year-old daughter and a grief so profound it felt like drowning. The university had been understanding at first. Bereavement leave, reduced teaching loads, counseling resources. They'd offered everything except what he really needed, the ability to turn back time and save his wife. When he couldn't focus on lectures, when research deadlines slipped past unnoticed, when prestigious conferences were missed because Victoria had a fever, the sympathy gradually transformed into professional concern. The department needs consistency, the dean had explained during their final meeting. We understand your loss, Oliver, but the students deserve better than what you're able to provide right now. Perhaps some time away from academia would help you process this tragedy and decide what direction you want your career to take. The termination had been wrapped in compassionate language, but the result was the same. Dr. Oliver Matthews ceased to exist, replaced by a single father who would take any honest work to provide for his daughter. The transition from respected academic to night shift janitor had been brutal, but Victoria needed stability more than his pride needed protection. "Daddy?" Victoria's voice pulled him back to the present. "You're making that face again." Oliver realized he'd been staring out the window, lost in memories that still carried the power to overwhelm him. Victoria was watching him with concern that no 5-year-old should need to feel for her parent. "Sorry, baby girl. Just remembering something from before you were big enough to remember." He helped her select a pink crayon for the princess's dress. "Tell me more about the butterfly song you learned today." As Victoria sang in her sweet, slightly off-key voice, Oliver made a silent promise. Whatever Clara Hendricks discovered about his past, whatever consequences came from today's confrontation, he would protect this moment. This was what mattered now, not the life he'd lost, but the life they were building together. The knock on their apartment door came at exactly 8 o'clock, just as Oliver was reading Victoria her bedtime story. Oliver opened the door to find Clara Hendricks standing in the hallway of his modest apartment building, looking completely out of place in her designer business suit. Her usual confident demeanor seemed shaken, and she clutched a manila folder against her chest like armor. Behind her, the building's flickering hallway light cast shadows that made her appear younger, more vulnerable than the commanding CEO he'd encountered that morning. "How did you find my address?" Oliver asked quietly, instinctively positioning himself to block her view into the apartment where Victoria was supposed to be falling asleep. "Company employment records," Clara replied, her voice lacking its usual sharp edge. "I need to talk to you. I need to understand what happened today, who you really are." "Daddy?" Victoria's small voice called from the bedroom. "Who's at the door?" Oliver glanced back toward his daughter's room, then at Clara. "This isn't an appropriate time or place for this conversation. Whatever you think you need to know can wait until tomorrow." "No, it can't," Clara insisted, stepping closer. "I've spent the entire day investigating you, Oliver Matthews. Or should I say Dr. Oliver Matthews, formerly of Harvard University's Classical Studies department. Published author of 12 academic papers on legal linguistics. consultant to 3 international law firms specializing in historical property disputes. The hallway seemed to grow smaller around them as Clara spoke. Oliver could feel his carefully constructed new identity crumbling with each word she uttered. 3 years of building a simple life, of protecting Victoria from the complications of his past, threatened to unravel in this narrow, poorly lit corridor. "You were brilliant," Clara continued, opening the folder to reveal printed pages from academic journals and university websites. "Your research on Roman legal precedents in modern international law was groundbreaking. You had tenure, respect, a future that most academics only dream about. So what happened? Why is a Harvard professor cleaning floors in my building? Daddy, I can't sleep." Victoria appeared in the hallway behind Oliver, rubbing her eyes with small fists. She wore her favorite purple pajamas with unicorns, and her hair stuck up in all directions from her pillow. When she noticed Clara, she moved closer to Oliver's leg, suddenly shy. Clara's expression softened immediately upon seeing the little girl. The aggressive interrogation stance melted away, replaced by something approaching gentleness. "Hello," she said quietly, crouching down to Victoria's eye level. "You must be Victoria." "I'm Clara." Victoria studied Clara with the frank assessment of childhood. "You're very pretty," she announced. "But you look sad." "Victoria," Oliver said gently, "you should be in bed. I'll come tuck you in again in just a minute." "Can the pretty lady come too?" Victoria asked, displaying the easy trust that both blessed and terrified Oliver as a parent. "She looks like she needs a hug." Clara's professional composure cracked entirely at Victoria's innocent observation. Tears gathered in her green eyes as she realized this child, this beautiful little girl, was living in a tiny apartment because Clara had systematically destroyed her father's attempts to rebuild his life with dignity. Clara started, then stopped, overwhelmed by emotion she hadn't expected to feel. "I should go. This was a mistake." "Wait," Oliver said, recognizing genuine distress beneath Clara's usual armor. "Victoria's right. You do look like you need a hug. And she's also right that you look sad. Why don't you come in for a few minutes? We can talk after I get her settled." Clara hesitated, glancing around the small apartment's living room. The furniture was second-hand but clean, the walls decorated with Victoria's artwork and a few carefully chosen family photos. Despite its modest size, the space radiated warmth and love in a way that Clara's expensive penthouse never had. "Please," Victoria added, tugging on Clara's hand with surprising boldness. "Daddy makes the best hot chocolate, and I want to show you my princess book." Looking at Victoria's hopeful face, Clara realized she couldn't refuse. Whatever complicated emotions were driving her pursuit of Oliver's truth, this innocent child didn't deserve to be caught in the crossfire. "Okay," Clara whispered. "Just for a few minutes." 20 minutes later, Victoria was finally asleep after showing Clara every page of her coloring book and extracting promises that the pretty lady would visit again soon. Oliver emerged from the bedroom to find Clara sitting on his small couch, staring at a framed photograph on the side table. The picture showed Oliver, a beautiful woman with Victoria's dark hair, and baby Victoria at what appeared to be a family picnic. "Your wife was lovely," Clara said softly, setting the photo down carefully. "Victoria has her smile." "Had," Oliver corrected gently, settling into the chair across from her. "Sarah died 3 years ago. Heart condition we didn't know she had." Clara's expression shifted to one of genuine sympathy. "I'm so sorry. I can't imagine losing someone you love that way, being left to raise a child alone." "It changes everything," Oliver said simply. "Priorities, goals, what matters and what doesn't. Academia became impossible when Victoria needed consistent care. The university was patient for a while, but ultimately they needed someone who could give the job their full attention." "So you became a janitor," Clara stated, though without the judgment that had colored her voice that morning. "I became whatever I needed to become to provide for my daughter," Oliver replied. "Some days I clean offices, some days I do translation work freelance, sometimes I tutor high school students in Latin. It's not glamorous, but it pays the bills and keeps us together." Clara was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. "The translation this morning, You knew about our acquisition deal because you've been working on those exact types of contracts freelance, haven't you? Oliver nodded. Intellectual property transfers involving classical legal concepts are my specialty. Your company has been a client through intermediary firms for about 6 months. I've translated 4 separate documents related to your European expansion. And I never knew, Clara whispered, the irony hitting her like a physical blow. I've been paying you through consulting fees while humiliating you as an employee. I've been benefiting from your expertise while treating you like you were worthless. The weight of her actions settled over Clara like a heavy blanket. She thought about every condescending comment, every dismissive gesture, every time she'd made someone feel small to make herself feel powerful. The pattern extended far beyond Oliver. It was how she'd treated most people throughout her career. Why didn't you tell me? She asked. This morning, when I made that horrible bet, why didn't you just explain who you were? Oliver considered his answer carefully. Because I shouldn't have to justify my worth based on my past accomplishments. A person's value isn't determined by their job title or education level. Victoria's babysitter is one of the kindest, most intelligent people I know, and she never finished high school. The dignity of work isn't conditional on prestige. Clara felt something uncomfortable and unfamiliar stirring in her chest, shame mixed with admiration for this man who'd maintained his principles despite everything he'd lost. She'd built her entire identity around being better than other people, more successful, more important. Meeting Oliver forced her to confront how empty that foundation really was. I owe you an apology, Clara said quietly. Not just for today, but for the kind of person I've become, the kind of leader I've been. Apology accepted, Oliver replied without hesitation. But you should know that I'm going to hold you to that bet. $150,000 witnessed by your employees. Clara looked up sharply, surprised by his directness. You're serious about that? Completely serious, Oliver confirmed. Victoria deserves better than wondering if we can afford groceries this month. She deserves stability, opportunities, a future that isn't limited by financial stress. That money could change everything for her. And what about you? Clara asked. What do you deserve? Oliver glanced toward Victoria's bedroom, where he could hear her soft breathing in the darkness. I deserve to give my daughter the best life possible. Everything else is just details. Clara realized in that moment that she was looking at a kind of wealth she'd never understood, the richness of love, purpose, and genuine fulfillment that had nothing to do with bank accounts or corporate titles. What if I offered you something more than money? She asked quietly. Clara leaned forward, her business instincts awakening despite the emotional revelation of the evening. What if I offered you a position with Grandview Industries? A real position, using your actual skills and education. Senior consultant for international acquisitions, specializing in legal linguistics and historical property rights. Oliver studied her face, searching for signs that this was another game, another test designed to humiliate him. What's the catch? No catch, Clara replied, though her voice carried a note of uncertainty. The salary would be commensurate with your experience and expertise, probably around $120,000 annually, plus benefits, flexible schedule to accommodate Victoria's needs. The offer hung in the air between them like a bridge Oliver wasn't sure he could trust. 3 years of struggle had taught him to be wary of opportunities that seemed too good to be true. Yet Clara's expression seemed genuine, marked by the vulnerability he'd glimpsed when Victoria offered her a hug. Why? Oliver asked simply. This morning you were humiliating me in front of your employees. Tonight you're offering me a career. What changed? Clara was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands folded in her lap. When she looked up, her green eyes held a sadness that reminded Oliver of Victoria's observation about needing a hug. Victoria changed it, Clara said softly. Seeing her, seeing how you've raised her, seeing the kind of man you are despite everything you've lost, it made me realize what kind of person I've become. She stood up, walking to the window that overlooked the parking lot of Oliver's modest apartment complex. I built my entire identity around being successful, being powerful, being better than everyone else. But I've never built anything that mattered. I've never had anyone look at me the way Victoria looks at you, with pure love and trust. Clara, Oliver began, but she held up a hand to stop him. Let me finish, she said. I'm 38 years old and I have everything society says should make me happy. Money, power, respect, a corner office on the 40th floor. But I go home to an empty penthouse every night and eat takeout alone while answering emails. I haven't had a real conversation with another human being in months before tonight. Oliver felt an unexpected surge of sympathy for this woman who had seemed so intimidating just hours before. Success without connection, achievement without love. It was a kind of poverty he'd never considered. The truth is, Clara continued, turning back to face him, I need you more than you need me. Your expertise would be invaluable to our international expansion, but more than that, I need to learn how to be a better person, how to find meaning in something other than dominating other people. And you think offering me a job will accomplish that? I think working with someone who's maintained his integrity, despite incredible hardship, might teach me something about what really matters, Clara said. I think having a colleague who chooses dignity over revenge, who prioritizes his daughter's well-being over his own pride, might show me how to be the kind of leader people respect, rather than fear. Oliver considered her words carefully. The position she described would indeed change everything for Victoria. Better schools, a stable home, opportunities he could only dream about on his current income. But it would also mean trusting Clara Hendricks with their future, believing that this moment of vulnerability represented genuine change rather than temporary emotion. There's something else you should know, Clara said quietly. Something about why I recognized your work so quickly this morning. Why I had that specific document with me. Oliver felt a chill of premonition. What do you mean? The acquisition we're finalizing, Apollon Enterprises in Athens, they specifically requested you as the translator for the final contracts. They've been working with you freelance for months and insisted that only Dr. Oliver Matthews could handle the linguistic complexities of their intellectual property transfers. The room seemed to spin around Oliver as the implications hit him. You knew. When you made that bet this morning, you already knew who I was. I suspected, Clara admitted, her voice barely audible. But I didn't know for certain until you decided to humiliate me publicly to see if I would reveal myself, Oliver finished, feeling the trust he'd begun to build crumbling around them. Clara nodded miserably. I told myself it was just business, just confirming the identity of a consultant. But the truth is, I enjoyed the power. I enjoyed having control over someone I thought was beneath me. The betrayal cut deeper than Oliver had expected. The silence in Oliver's small living room stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. Clara stood frozen by the window, watching Oliver's face transform as the full weight of her manipulation became clear. The vulnerable woman who had shared hot chocolate and admired Victoria's drawings was disappearing, replaced by the calculating CEO he'd encountered that morning. You set me up, Oliver said quietly, his voice carrying a dangerous calm that made Clara step back instinctively. The entire humiliation this morning was orchestrated. You knew exactly who I was, what I was capable of, and you decided to torture me for your own entertainment. Oliver, please let me explain. Explain what? Oliver's control finally cracked, though he kept his voice low enough not to wake Victoria. Explain how you've been paying me freelance fees with one hand while degrading me with the other. Explain how you brought confidential documents to work specifically to test whether I'd break character and reveal my education. Clara felt tears stinging her eyes, but she knew they were worthless now. The trust she'd seen growing between them over the past hour had been built on quicksand, and her confession had just triggered the inevitable collapse. It started as business, Clara whispered. Apollon Enterprises said their translator was brilliant but insisted on anonymity. When I saw the name O. Matthews on the consulting contracts, I started investigating. Finding out you worked in our building as a janitor was unexpected. So you decided to have some fun with it, Oliver said bitterly. See how the mighty Harvard professor had fallen. Enjoy watching him push a mop around your marble floors. No, that's not. Clara stopped herself. recognizing the lie before it fully formed. That was exactly what she'd done, at least initially. The power dynamic had been irresistible to someone who'd built her identity around superiority over others. Oliver moved to the door, holding it open in clear dismissal. "I want you to leave. Now." "Oliver, wait. The job offer was real. I meant everything I said about needing to change, about learning from you." "The job offer was guilt," Oliver interrupted. "Conscience money from someone who realized she'd gone too far." "You don't want to learn from me, Clara. You want to ease your guilt by throwing money at the problem you created." Clara felt something inside her chest breaking apart as she recognized the truth in his words. Standing in this small apartment, surrounded by the evidence of Oliver's love for his daughter, she'd felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Genuine human connection. The possibility of being better than she was, of finding meaning beyond her next quarterly earnings report. "You're right," she said quietly, gathering her folder and moving toward the door. "About all of it. I am everything you think I am. And worse." As she reached the threshold, Clara turned back one last time. Oliver was already closing the door, his face a mask of controlled anger and disappointment. Behind him, she could see the hallway leading to Victoria's room, where a little girl slept peacefully, trusting that her father would protect her from a world full of people like Clara Hendricks. "For what it's worth," Clara whispered, "tonight was the first time in years I felt like I might be capable of being better. Victoria was right. I do need a hug, but I don't deserve one." The door closed with a soft click, leaving Clara alone in the fluorescent-lit hallway of a building where she'd never belonged. As she walked toward the elevator, she could hear the faint sounds of Oliver moving around inside the apartment, probably double-checking the locks, protecting his daughter from the threat Clara represented. Back in her penthouse apartment an hour later, Clara stood in her pristine kitchen staring at the city lights through floor-to-ceiling windows. The silence felt different now, not peaceful but oppressive, weighted with the knowledge of what she'd destroyed through her own cruelty. Her phone buzzed with a text message from James Patterson, her legal director. "Board meeting moved to 8 a.m. tomorrow. Apollon acquisition needs final approval. Still need Dr. Matthews for contract review?" Clara stared at the message for a long time before typing her response. "Find someone else." But even as she sent the text, Clara knew there was no one else. Oliver's expertise was too specialized, too crucial to the deal that would define her company's future, which meant that tomorrow she would have to face him again, not as the vulnerable woman seeking redemption, but as the CEO who needed his services regardless of personal consequences. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd spent years building walls between her personal and professional lives, maintaining the fiction that business could remain separate from human decency. Now those worlds were colliding in the worst possible way. Oliver arrived at Grandview Industries the next morning 30 minutes early, using his keycard to access the building before most employees arrived. He'd spent the night staring at the ceiling, alternating between anger and a hollow disappointment that surprised him with its intensity. In the space of a few hours, Clara had shown him glimpses of genuine vulnerability, then shattered any possibility of trust with her confession of manipulation. Victoria had sensed his mood during their morning routine, offering extra hugs and asking repeatedly if he was feeling better today. Her innocent concern only reinforced his determination to protect her from the complications of adult cruelty and corporate politics. The executive floor was eerily quiet as Oliver began his cleaning routine, moving through the familiar motions while his mind churned through the implications of last night's revelation. Clara's offer of employment had been genuine in the moment, he was certain of that, but it had also been built on guilt and the romantic notion that she could somehow redeem herself through one grand gesture. He was mopping near the conference room when he heard the elevator doors open. Clara's voice carried down the hallway, crisp and professional as she spoke into her phone. "Yes, I understand the timeline is tight. No, we haven't secured a replacement translator yet. The original consultant has become unavailable." Oliver continued working, keeping his head down as Clara approached. She'd returned to her full CEO armor, designer suit, perfect makeup, confident stride that announced her authority to anyone within sight. Only someone who'd seen her vulnerable just hours before might notice the slight tension around her eyes, the way her free hand trembled almost imperceptibly as she ended her call. "Oliver," Clara said quietly when she reached him. He looked up briefly, meeting her eyes for just a moment before returning to his work. "Ms. Hendricks." The formal address hit Clara like a physical blow. After the intimacy of sharing her fears and vulnerabilities in his apartment, the return to professional distance felt like a door slamming shut between them. "I need to speak with you," Clara said. "About the Apollon acquisition. About your translation work for the final contracts. I told you last night, find someone else." "There is no one else," Clara replied, frustration creeping into her voice. "You know the specifics of this deal better than anyone. The linguistic complexities, the historical precedents, the patent classifications. It would take months to bring another translator up to speed, and we have days." Oliver straightened, finally giving her his full attention. "So this is the real reason for your visit last night. Not guilt, not a desire to change, but the realization that you need something from me and couldn't afford to have me quit." "That's not true," Clara protested, though she could hear how weak the denial sounded even to herself. "Isn't it?" Oliver challenged. "You knew this morning when you made your little bet that you'd need my services again. You knew that humiliating me publicly might jeopardize a multi-million-dollar deal, but you couldn't resist the opportunity to feel superior, so you took the risk anyway." Clara felt the walls of her carefully constructed professional persona beginning to crack under Oliver's steady gaze. He was right about her motivations, right about the calculated nature of her cruelty, right about everything that made her feel ashamed of who she'd become. "The board meeting is in 2 hours, Clara said, switching tactics to pure business necessity. "If I can't assure them that our translation protocols are secure, they might postpone the acquisition indefinitely. That means hundreds of jobs, millions in revenue, partnerships that took years to negotiate. And that's my problem because you're a good man," Clara said desperately. "Because despite everything I've done, you wouldn't sabotage innocent people's livelihoods to punish me." Oliver studied her face, recognizing the manipulation even as he acknowledged the truth embedded within it. The Apollon deal did affect more than just Clara's ambitions. Administrative assistants, maintenance staff, factory workers whose jobs depended on the company's continued growth and success. "One contract," Oliver said finally. "The final translation work only. Payment through the usual intermediary firm, no direct contact with your company. After that, you find permanent replacement services." Relief flooded Clara's features so completely that Oliver almost felt sorry for her. Almost. "Thank you," she whispered. "I know you have every reason to refuse, and I'm grateful that—" "Don't," Oliver interrupted. "Don't make this about gratitude or redemption or any of the other pretty words you used last night. This is business, nothing more." As Oliver returned to his cleaning, Clara stood motionless in the hallway, watching him work with the same meticulous care he brought to everything involving Victoria's welfare. She'd gotten what she came for, his agreement to complete the translation work, but it felt like the hollow-east victory of her career. The elevator chimed again, and James Patterson emerged with several other executives, all focused on the morning's crucial board meeting. Clara straightened her shoulders and fell into step beside them, slipping back into her role as the decisive leader who never let personal feelings interfere with business success. But as she walked away, Clara couldn't shake the image of Oliver returning to his mop and bucket, his dignity intact, despite everything she'd tried to take from him. 3 days later, Oliver sat in the small public library near Victoria's school, working on his laptop while she attended her after-school art program. The Apollon translation project spread across multiple documents on his screen, complex legal terminology that bridged ancient property law with modern intellectual property rights. Despite his lingering anger toward Clara, he found himself drawn into the intricate linguistic puzzles that had once defined his academic career. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Translation questions about Section 7B. Can we talk? Clara." Oliver stared at the message for several minutes before typing back. Email only, through Patterson and Legal. The response came immediately. This is personal, about Victoria. Ice formed in Oliver's stomach as he read the words. He glanced around the library's children's section, where Victoria should be safe in her art class for another hour, then stepped outside to call the number. What about Victoria? He demanded without preamble. She's fine, Clara said quickly. She's still in her class. I'm actually here at the community center watching through the window. She's painting what looks like a rainbow. You're watching my daughter? Oliver's voice carried a dangerous edge that made several passers-by glance in his direction. Oliver, please listen. I hired a private investigator to look into your background after our conversation. I thought I was just verifying your credentials for the translation work, but he found something else. Something about Sarah's death. Oliver felt the world tilt slightly off its axis. What are you talking about? The heart condition that killed your wife. It wasn't natural. According to the medical examiner's report, it was caused by a drug interaction, a medication that should never have been prescribed to someone with her genetic markers. The phone slipped in Oliver's suddenly sweaty palm. That's impossible. The doctor said it was undiagnosed, that there was no way to predict. Dr. Marcus Webb, Clara interrupted. He was Sarah's cardiologist during her pregnancy with Victoria. He prescribed the medication that caused the fatal interaction, and he knew about her genetic predisposition because he had ordered the tests himself. Oliver leaned against the library's brick wall, struggling to process what Clara was telling him. 3 years of grief, 3 years of believing that Sarah's death was a tragic accident, 3 years of telling Victoria that sometimes bad things just happened for no reason. Why are you telling me this? Oliver asked when he could finally speak. Because Dr. Webb is dead, Clara said quietly. Apparent suicide 6 months ago. But before he died, he sent a confession to the medical board admitting to multiple cases of medical malpractice, including Sarah's case. The board buried the report to avoid lawsuits and publicity. You're saying someone covered up the fact that my wife was murdered by medical negligence? I'm saying that someone with a lot of influence made sure the truth never came to light. Someone who had connections to both the medical board and the hospital where Sarah died. Oliver closed his eyes, trying to steady himself against the wave of rage and grief threatening to overwhelm him. Who? Clara's voice was barely audible when she answered. My father, Dr. Richard Hendricks. He was chairman of the medical board when Sarah died, and he's been covering up malpractice cases for years to protect his own investments in several private hospitals. The revelation hit Oliver like a physical blow. Clara's father, the man who had shaped her ruthless approach to business and life, had been directly responsible for covering up the malpractice that killed Sarah. The woman who had humiliated him, manipulated him, and then tried to buy his forgiveness was the daughter of the man who had stolen his wife's life. Oliver, are you still there? Where is he now? Oliver asked, his voice unnaturally calm. Retired in Florida. But Oliver, there's more. The private investigator found evidence that my father specifically requested information about your family 3 years ago, right after Sarah died. He knew who you were, knew about your expertise in legal linguistics, and he's been tracking your career ever since. Tracking me for what? I don't know, Clara admitted, but I think our meeting wasn't as random as it seemed. I think my father has been manipulating events to bring us together, though I don't understand why. Oliver felt pieces of a larger puzzle beginning to shift in his mind, forming connections he didn't want to acknowledge. Clara's sudden interest in humiliating him, the specific timing of the Apollon acquisition that required his expertise, even his hiring as a janitor at Grandview Industries. Too many coincidences for comfort. Victoria is finishing her class, Clara said. She's putting her painting away. Oliver, I know you have no reason to trust me, but I think we're both being manipulated by someone much more dangerous than either of us realized. Through the library window, Oliver could see Victoria skipping down the community center steps, her face bright with the joy of creation and childhood innocence. In a few minutes, she would run to him with sticky fingers and stories about her artwork, trusting that her father could protect her from anything the world might throw at them. But Oliver was beginning to realize that some threats came from directions he'd never thought to guard against. "Meet me tonight," he said quietly, "after Victoria's asleep. And Clara, bring everything your investigator found. All of it." Clara arrived at Oliver's apartment building at 9 o'clock sharp, carrying a thick manila envelope and wearing jeans and a simple sweater instead of her usual business attire. She looked younger this way, more vulnerable, and Oliver had to remind himself that appearances could be as manipulated as everything else in their complicated relationship. "Victoria's asleep?" Clara asked as Oliver led her into the apartment. "Finally. She wanted to show me her painting from today about 50 times, then insisted on reading me a story instead of the other way around." Despite the gravity of their meeting, Oliver couldn't suppress a small smile at the memory of Victoria's earnest storytelling. Clara spread the contents of the envelope across Oliver's small dining table: police reports, medical records, financial documents, and dozens of photographs that painted a disturbing picture of corruption and cover-ups spanning decades. In the center of it all was a photograph of Dr. Richard Hendricks, Clara's father, shaking hands with several hospital administrators at what appeared to be an award ceremony. "My father built his career on cleaning up medical scandals," Clara began, pointing to various documents. "What I never knew was that he wasn't preventing them, he was managing them, controlling the narrative, burying the evidence, protecting wealthy doctors and hospital systems from the consequences of their negligence." Oliver studied a copy of Dr. Webb's confession letter, his hands trembling slightly as he read the clinical description of how the wrong medication had triggered Sarah's fatal heart condition. The letter mentioned 3 other similar cases, all involving young women with specific genetic markers that should have been red flags for any competent cardiologist. Dr. Webb wasn't incompetent, Clara continued. He was participating in an unlawful medical trial, testing drug interactions on patients without their knowledge or consent. My father coordinated the cover-ups when patients died or suffered severe complications. "Human experimentation," Oliver said quietly, the words feeling foreign and terrible in his mouth. "Sarah was murdered for a medical experiment." "Oliver, there's more." Clara pulled out a financial document showing wire transfers from several pharmaceutical companies to accounts controlled by Richard Hendricks. The payments continued for 2 years after Sarah's death. My father was being compensated for his silence and cooperation. Oliver stood up abruptly, pacing to the window that overlooked the parking lot. 3 years of grief and guilt crashed over him in waves as he processed the magnitude of what had been hidden from him. Sarah hadn't died from an undiagnosed condition. She'd been killed by people who saw her as expendable, a test subject whose life mattered less than their research data. "Why are you showing me this?" Oliver asked without turning around. "What do you want from me?" "I want justice," Clara replied. "For Sarah, for the other victims, for everyone my father has hurt over the years. But I also want to understand why he's been watching you, why our paths crossed in such a deliberate way." Clara pulled out a surveillance photo, showing Oliver pushing Victoria on a swing at a local park. The timestamp indicated it was taken just 2 weeks before he started working at Grandview Industries. "He's been having you followed," Clara said. "Not just casual monitoring, active surveillance. Someone wanted to know your routines, your vulnerabilities, your daily schedule. Planning something," Oliver realized, his blood turning cold. "But what?" "I think he wants to recruit you," Clara said carefully. "Your expertise in legal linguistics makes you valuable for covering up medical malpractice. You could translate foreign medical documents, obscure legal precedents, make evidence disappear into linguistic complexities that most investigators couldn't follow." Oliver spun around to face her. "And you think I'd help the people who killed my wife?" "No," Clara said firmly. "But I think my father believes he can force you to cooperate. Through threats, blackmail, or..." She paused, glancing toward Victoria's bedroom door. "Leverage involving Victoria." The implication hit Oliver like ice water. "He would threaten my daughter?" "He's threatened people's children before," Clara said, pulling out police reports documenting suspicious accidents and break-ins targeting families of potential whistleblowers. "My father doesn't just cover up medical crimes, he silences anyone who might expose them." Oliver sank back into his chair, overwhelmed by the scope of the conspiracy Clara was revealing. The man who had covered up Sarah's murder was now positioning himself to either recruit or silence the victim's husband. And Victoria was caught in the middle of something far more dangerous than Oliver had ever imagined. "There's something else," Clara said quietly. "The reason I really came to work early that morning. The reason I had that translation document with me. My father called me the night before and told me to test your linguistic abilities. He said it was time to evaluate the asset and determine if you were ready for the next phase." "I was never a janitor applying for a job," Oliver said, the pieces finally clicking into place. "I was a target being positioned for recruitment." "Yes," Clara whispered. "And I was the bait, though I didn't understand that until tonight. Everything that's happened between us, the humiliation, the job offer, even this investigation, it's all been orchestrated by someone who's been planning this for 3 years." Oliver looked at the evidence spread across his table, then at Clara's frightened face, and finally toward Victoria's bedroom where his daughter slept peacefully, unaware that her very existence was being used as a weapon against her father. "What do we do?" Oliver asked. "We disappear," Clara said. "Tonight, all 3 of us, before my father realizes I've betrayed him. I can't just run away with you," Oliver said, though his voice lacked conviction even as he spoke the words. "Victoria has school, friends, a life here. I can't uproot her based on theories and suspicions." Clara gathered the photographs showing surveillance of Victoria at the playground, at her school, walking with Oliver to the grocery store. "These aren't theories. My father has been watching your daughter for months, learning her routines, identifying her vulnerabilities. Look at this." She handed Oliver a document that made his blood freeze. It was Victoria's complete medical file, including records from appointments Oliver had never authorized. Blood tests, psychological evaluations, even a genetic profile that matched the markers found in Sarah's case. "Someone has been conducting medical examinations on Victoria without your knowledge," Clara said quietly. "The same genetic markers that made Sarah vulnerable to the drug that killed her. Victoria has them too." Oliver's hands shook as he read through the unauthorized medical reports. Victoria's pediatrician, Dr. Sandra Martinez, had apparently been filing additional reports beyond their regular checkups, documenting his daughter's genetic susceptibility to the exact type of medication that had murdered her mother. "Dr. Martinez is part of this?" Oliver asked, recognizing the signature on several documents. "Probably not willingly," Clara replied. "Look at the financial records. Someone has been making substantial donations to the clinic where Victoria receives care. My father has a pattern of buying cooperation through charitable contributions and then leveraging that generosity to request small favors. The revelation that his daughter's trusted pediatrician had been secretly documenting her genetic vulnerabilities felt like a violation beyond Oliver's comprehension. Every routine checkup, every vaccination, every moment he'd trusted medical professionals to care for Victoria had been corrupted by people who saw her as another potential test subject. "We need to leave," Clara pressed. "Tonight, before anyone realizes I've shared this information with you, I have cash, untraceable accounts, connections who can help us disappear until we figure out how to expose this safely." Oliver looked around his small apartment, the home he'd built for Victoria after Sarah's death, filled with artwork and memories and the simple joy of watching his daughter grow up safely. The idea of abandoning everything they'd built together felt impossible, but the alternative was potentially watching Victoria become another victim of the conspiracy that had already stolen her mother. "Where would we go?" Oliver asked, hating himself for even considering Clara's proposal. "I have a cabin in Montana. Off the grid, no paper trail connecting it to either of us. We could stay there while we figure out how to gather enough evidence to bring down my father and everyone else involved in this." "And what about your life? Your company? Everything you've worked for?" Clara laughed bitterly. "Everything I've worked for was built on blood money and corruption. Grandview Industries exists because my father funneled illegal pharmaceutical profits through shell companies to fund our expansion. I've been an unknowing accomplice to murder for years." The weight of Clara's confession settled over them like heavy smoke. She wasn't just offering to help Oliver and Victoria escape. She was offering to abandon her entire identity, to become a fugitive from the empire her family had built on other people's suffering. Why would you do this? Oliver asked. Give up everything to help us? Because Victoria deserves better than being hunted by the people who killed her mother, Clara said simply. Because you showed me what real love looks like. What it means to sacrifice everything for someone else's well-being. And because I can't live with myself if I let my father hurt any more innocent people. Oliver walked to Victoria's bedroom door, listening to his daughter's soft breathing in the darkness. She was dreaming peacefully, trusting that tomorrow would bring another normal day of school and art classes and bedtime stories. The idea of waking her up in the middle of the night to flee their life seemed impossible, but so did the idea of leaving her vulnerable to people who had already demonstrated their willingness to kill. If we do this, Oliver said finally, if we run, there's no going back. We become fugitives, criminals, people who abandoned their responsibilities to hide from the truth. Or, Clara replied, we become the people who refuse to let evil win, the people who chose to fight for justice instead of accepting victimization. Oliver thought about Sarah, about the life they'd planned together, about the future they'd dreamed of giving Victoria. All of it had been stolen by people who treated human lives as expendable resources in their quest for profit and power. Perhaps running away wasn't cowardice. Perhaps it was the first step toward reclaiming their right to live without fear. How long do we have? Oliver asked. My father expects a report tomorrow morning about your evaluation. When I don't provide it, he'll know something has gone wrong. We have maybe 6 hours before he starts looking for us. Oliver made his decision with the same quiet determination that had carried him through 3 years of single parenthood and financial struggle. Help me pack Victoria's things, and Clara, if you're lying to me about any of this, if this is some elaborate manipulation, I will make sure you regret it for the rest of your life. I know, Clara said quietly, but I'm not lying. I'm trying to save the little girl who offered me a hug when I didn't deserve one. As they began gathering Victoria's clothes and favorite toys, Oliver realized they were crossing a line from which there might be no return. But for the first time since Sarah's death, he felt like he was finally fighting back against the people who had destroyed his family. The Montana cabin sat in a clearing surrounded by pine trees, 40 miles from the nearest town and accessible only by a dirt road that wound through federal forest land. Clara had purchased it years earlier as a retreat from corporate stress, never imagining it would become a sanctuary for a makeshift family fleeing her own father's murderous conspiracy. Victoria adapted to their new life with the resilience of childhood, treating their escape as an extended camping adventure. She helped Oliver chop firewood, learned to identify bird calls with Clara, and transformed the cabin's small loft into an elaborate playhouse filled with books and art supplies they'd bought during careful trips to distant towns. Daddy, why do we have to stay hidden? Victoria asked one evening as they sat by the fireplace, her 5-year-old intuition finally recognizing that their mountain retreat wasn't entirely voluntary. Oliver exchanged glances with Clara before answering. Because there are some bad people who want to hurt our family, sweetheart. We're staying here until it's safe to go home. Bad people like in the fairy tales? Sort of, Oliver replied. But remember how the princess always wins in the end? How good always defeats evil? Victoria nodded solemnly. Because love is stronger than being mean. For 6 weeks, they lived in careful isolation while Clara used encrypted communications to coordinate with investigative journalists and federal prosecutors, willing to examine the evidence against her father. Oliver translated complex medical documents that revealed the scope of the illegal experimentation, while Victoria remained blissfully unaware that her genetic profile made her a target for the same people who had killed her mother. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday morning when Clara's secure phone buzzed with a message from FBI agent Rebecca Stone. Arrests being made. Safe to come in. Dr. Hendricks in custody. Oliver found Clara standing on the cabin's small porch, tears streaming down her face as she read the message. It's over, she whispered. The FBI raided my father's office, the hospital, Dr. Martinez's clinic. They have everything. What about Victoria's medical records? Sealed as evidence. No one else will ever have access to her genetic information. Clara turned to face Oliver, her expression mixing relief with profound sadness. My father will spend the rest of his life in prison. Most of his co-conspirators are already pleading guilty in exchange for reduced sentences. Oliver felt a weight he'd carried for 3 years finally beginning to lift from his shoulders. Sarah's death would finally be recognized as murder rather than medical misfortune. The people responsible would face justice. Victoria would be safe from those who saw her as an experimental subject rather than a beloved child. "What happens now?" Oliver asked. "You and Victoria go home," Clara said simply. "You rebuild your lives without looking over your shoulders. You let her be a normal little girl who doesn't need to hide in the mountains." "And what about you?" Clara was quiet for a long moment, watching Victoria chase butterflies in the clearing beside the cabin. "I testify against my father and everyone else involved in the conspiracy. I help the authorities untangle decades of corruption and cover-ups, and then I figure out how to live with the knowledge of what my family has done." Oliver recognized the pain in Clara's voice, the same grief he'd felt when his own world collapsed after Sarah's death. She was losing everything that had defined her identity, just as he had lost his academic career and comfortable future, but she was choosing to sacrifice her old life to protect innocent people from further harm. "Victoria will miss you," Oliver said. "I'll miss her too," Clara replied. "She taught me what love looks like when it's not conditional on power or success. She showed me that kindness isn't weakness." That evening, as they prepared for their return to the outside world, Victoria insisted on drawing a picture for Clara. The artwork showed 3 stick figures holding hands in front of a small house, with "family" written in crayon across the bottom. "This is you and me and Daddy," Victoria explained, pointing to each figure. "Because you helped keep us safe from the bad people, so now you're part of our family forever." Clara knelt to Victoria's eye level, accepting the drawing with hands that trembled slightly. "Thank you, sweetheart. This is the most beautiful picture anyone has ever given me. Will you visit us when we go home?" Clara looked at Oliver over Victoria's head, seeing understanding in his eyes. "Whenever you need me," Clara promised. "Whenever you need someone to remind you that love is stronger than being mean." 3 months later, Oliver stood in the courtroom as a federal judge sentenced Dr. Richard Hendricks to life in prison without parole for conspiracy to commit murder. Sarah's death had been publicly acknowledged as medical murder, part of a systematic pattern of illegal human experimentation that had claimed dozens of lives over 2 decades. Clara testified for 6 days, providing detailed evidence that ensured convictions for everyone involved in the conspiracy. Her father never looked at her during the proceedings, but Oliver saw the moment when she realized that justice mattered more than family loyalty. After the sentencing, Oliver and Victoria walked out of the courthouse into bright autumn sunlight. Victoria was now 6 years old, enrolled in a new school where her medical records were properly protected, and showing no signs of the trauma that had driven them into hiding. "Daddy, is Mama watching us from heaven?" Victoria asked as they waited for their taxi. "I think so, sweetheart. I think she's very proud of how brave you've been. Do you think she's proud of Clara too, for helping catch the bad people?" Oliver looked back at the courthouse steps, where Clara stood surrounded by reporters and federal prosecutors. She'd lost her company, her fortune, and her family, but she'd gained something more valuable: the knowledge that she'd chosen justice over comfort, truth over convenience. "Yes," Oliver said, lifting Victoria into his arms. "I think Mama is very proud of Clara, and I think she's proud of us for learning that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is trust someone who's trying to become better than they used to be." As their taxi pulled away from the courthouse, Oliver saw Clara in the rear window, standing alone but no longer hiding from the truth. Victoria waved goodbye until Clara disappeared from view, then settled against her father's shoulder with the contentment of a child who knew she was truly safe at last. The circle of love that had begun with a little girl's offer of a hug had grown to encompass justice, redemption, and the possibility that people could change when they chose courage over cruelty. And sometimes, Oliver thought as he held his daughter close, that was the most powerful victory of all.